John, I think it's time for you to get started.
Let's get going. We can just leave the questions up, Jason, or you could bring on the main lobby of the most offensive con that ever offensed. But with this, we want to talk about the state of offensive security and kind of what we are seeing in the world and what we're dealing with. And I've got a series of questions that I want to throw at the panel and kind of open it up. Eric is going to be hanging out with us as well. Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself? Because everybody else is like BHIS, and it's like, which of these things is not like the other in the game?
I definitely fit that organization. It's like, who's this weird guy?
But I think it's important to get some DFIR, some IR, some, like blue team side of this from a perspective. So tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Thank you so much, John. My name is Eric Taylor. I'm the CEO and Chief Forensic Operator here at Barricade Cyber Solutions. We are a digital cybersecurity firm that specializes in digital forensics and incident response. So, AKA, when it hits the fan, we're one of those companies that get called in to find out who did it, what did they take, what is it going to take to get back, and then get you back up to recovery as quickly as possible. So that's us in a nutshell.
And I think if you go to our like the lobby for this con, you're there under sponsors. So if they want to find out more about you, they can go and they can click and they can jump in. We appreciate that you're here because, like I said, ultimately our job is to make our jobs easier in offense, and it's to make your job easier. Or sorry, it's to make our jobs harder as pen testers, and it's to make your job easier. And I kind of want to open it up as a question for you, Eric, since you just introduced yourself. Joff and Ralph are with BHIS. A lot of you know them. They're on the news, and we just won't shut up once we start talking. So
me too.
We're going to make sure that we give you some time. Do you see defenses for organizations getting better or worse? Just a very, very simple binary question. I'm going to go around the panel on this. So are we getting better at defense or worse?
Is there a grammar limit I'm allowed to have? But absolutely worse. I mean, we're seeing more and more organizations get compromised by either internal negligence or sometimes even gross negligence, but also the MSP, the IT vendor that's supporting a lot of these businesses are just doing very poor tactics right now. So while there's a lot of controls and, PCI is just a laughing joke in my personal opinion. Nobody ever really follows it. They can mandate, all that they want to with the new PCI, but who's going to follow it? It's all self-assertion. So
God, Eric just comes out of the gate, starts attacking PCI. Holy moly. Does anybody want to take on CISA? Should we do that?
The comments and opinions are of Eric and not of Black Hills.
I have the inverse opinion. I think
go for it, Ralph. Yeah, because you're next.
Yes,
what do you think?
I think it's actually getting harder, right? I think it's getting harder. And I think that the defensive controls are getting better, right? But you have to realize that where I'm sitting, right? A lot of times the companies that hire us have already done this a bunch of times and they're having like a proactive response, right?
Or they're also hiring like other badass firms like Guardians or Trusted Sec.
Exactly.
So like, so last year we had our pen test with Bishop Fox, and then we had Trusted Sec, and then we had Guardians, and now it's your turn. You're like, great, put us at the end of that train.
So I mean, it's perspective, right? You end up with a client who's done this a bunch of times, and you find something really cool that next time, and then they fix it, and you're like, I worked so hard for that one thing, right? But yeah, I think it is getting better, but I also agree with you that the attack landscape is changing, and also it's getting applied to a larger swath of people who don't really have any security posture at all, right? So they're, the low-hanging fruit is getting bigger while the the hardened targets are getting a little bit harder. So
right. Joff, your turn. Just simple question. Is it getting harder or easier for offensive?
Yeah. So I kind of take a neutral position right now. I'm in Ralph's camp a little bit. I think the attack surface as we widen out our deployment of technologies is growing really, really fast. And I think the potential for misconfiguration is still a huge vector for attack for a lot of us. Counter to that, we do see on the traditional endpoints that the industry has succeeded in coming up with some very innovative approaches. So I look at it like a balloon that's being squeezed at one end, and one end tightens down and the other end kind of opens up. So I think, we have a shifting landscape in the attack surface and associated defense. And what we're doing as pen testers, and what threat actors are certainly doing, is watching that balloon as it gets squeezed and shifting over to the easier end of that spectrum wherever they can.
Very cool. Corey, thanks for joining us. You look like you're like, why am I awake right now? Well, welcome.
I may not know how to time zone, and I'm sorry for being late.
It's okay.
but
We
I'm
actually
here.
didn't blame you or the time zone. We blamed daylight savings time.
Oh,
Yes,
and they blame
nice.
me too, because it's always my fault. But
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
Joff, why did you
It's-
hack my computer again?
It's Joff's fault. So Corey, we start out with a simple question. Is it getting easier for offensive teams or harder for offensive teams breaking into places?
I think harder. As an offensive team and as someone who runs an offensive team, I think that there's a couple of things. Mainly, I think more and more products are integrating security without really that being their original intention, right? So we see like firewalls now have security, right? Email clients have security. Web applications have security built into them. Even like mobile phones are getting way more lockdown. I think more than anything, though, it's more just an increase in complexity more than an increase in difficulty. You basically have, tons of different interconnected tools. Now that we're seeing things move to the cloud, things are getting more complex, right? We don't have golden tickets, but we have golden SAML, or we don't have, we might not have the same Active Directory style attacks, but we have other ways of doing things where a lot of the times we'll do something, for an example, in a cloud environment, and clients will be like, sorry, what feature is that? I don't even have that. And we're like, yeah, you do. Everyone does.
It's right here.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think the complexity is higher. It takes more time to research and build attacks. It's not as simple as, oh, I ran a Metasploit payload and now I have a shell. But I think when you do get that access, when you do finally break through that barrier, I think that you might be in an area that's kind of where things are going, is us attackers are moving to areas where traditional security teams might not even know that we exist, right? So I think that's the biggest shift, is that I think it's more complex. You have more interconnected components, you have more products and things to mess around with, but overall, when you do break through that barrier, you could just be completely off the map, and the security team has no idea where you are. So
and
that's
that kind
my
of gets,
opinion.
And that's kind of I think GraphRunner articulated that, right? Whenever we're looking at cloud-based exploitation, GraphRunner for me was kind of, the team like Steve and Ralph and Bo and everybody, they're coming up with all these new techniques all the time, just to name a few. And GraphRunner, if somebody could put a link of GraphRunner in the chat, I think the biggest problem with GraphRunner is it does too much. It's almost overwhelming looking at the tool and all of the different things that it can do in your environment. In a cloud post-exploitation perspective, it's crazy. And that kind of leads back to, Eric, I wanted to kind of hit you up. When you're working incidents, are you still working traditional endpoint compromise incidents, or are most of the incidents that you're seeing Office 365 business email compromise type incidents that you're working?
That's a good layup. So, kind of piggyback a little bit off of Corey, but while things are getting a little bit more complicated, we're seeing a lot of we'll take Microsoft 365. A lot of the basics are not being enabled, like unified audit logging, things of that nature. We are seeing a wider spread of, GCP, Google Cloud product, Azure, AWS, a lot of overseas ones. So we're seeing a gamut of not only just endpoint, but also cloud infrastructure as well.
Right.
We're seeing even more business email compromises because they're able to live in that infrastructure almost unabated, because they don't have logs set up. They don't have rule notifications set up when, email forwarding is set up, put in place to, anytime an email comes over that says invoicing, it sends it off to this third party Gmail, Hotmail, whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
So they're able to live inside that infrastructure for a lot longer of a time than the traditional ransomware payloads.
It's harder for us, but it's harder for you too.
Hold on. I just want to call out something. JD50, before it disappears, if you're in the Discord, put a really, really good article up from Invictus IR, and it's a defender's guide to GraphRunner. everyone should go read that, because one of the reasons why BHIS releases tools like this is that these tools will become irrelevant. They'll only become irrelevant if people defend against those things. So I just want to do a shout out to JD50. Great article. Corey, you were saying something.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, it's interesting to hear from Eric's perspective, like as it gets more complex on our end attacking these environments, it's also getting more complex on the defensive side, right? Of like defending against, how do we even pull logs from Alibaba Cloud? How do we like
don't get me I'm gonna get on a soapbox.
Right. Yeah. But so the point is, and the other fun thing, and this is something we see a lot with like the ecosystem of InfoSealer logs, which, just is a crazy thing, but we'll see third party, we call it shadow IT. But recently for our customers, I'm creating these findings all the time. I'm like, shadow IT, shadow IT. Basically what that means is you have teams in your company who are spinning up infrastructure that isn't managed or monitored by the traditional security and IT teams, right? So like an example is, the marketing team wants to use this project management software. Everyone signs up for accounts. No one enables MFA. No one has, centrally managed logging or anything like that.
Not tracked by the systems team.
Yeah, not tracked by the systems team. Not like no one knows it exists. Then 6 months later, I come in, or I guess really before that happens, they get compromised by malware. Then I come in and I'm like, hey, I just logged into this project management platform that you guys have. And they're like, we don't have that. I just asked our IT team and they don't have it anywhere in the inventory. So what's going on? And the same thing happens with cloud platforms. The same thing happens. So, it's kind of like the attack surface increases from our attacker side. We can't even ask the customer, what cloud platforms do you use?
Because they don't know.
Because hopefully they somewhat know, but they might not know every single one.
I don't think there's anybody in the organization that knows all of them, right? Like that's the problem. Like, someone knows something.
Yeah.
So
another attack avenue too, I've noticed with a lot of the cloud services is the fact that all of this data is in one place, and a lot of it is starting to get indexed and searched for business purposes, right? But it also allows us to quickly enumerate that data, right? Before it was kind of like in different places, maybe file share here, maybe a web app there, so on and so forth. But right now that it's all in Office 365, you can pull all of that together. And then Eric, to your point about taking that data and then sending it off, you can set up something like Microsoft's Power VI or whatever the
Power Automate.
Power Automate. Sorry, it's changed its name like 3 times. But anyways, that you can use Power Automate to automatically do things and then get notifications, and you can pull emails out of inboxes before they even get there, right? So it's like it's in line. Before it was, so this landscape is changing, and how much data as an attacker, as soon as you get access, you can exploit is changing quickly as well.
And not to piggyback too far and go down this rabbit hole, but I just last week started messing with Copilot in one of our customer environments.
There we go, yeah.
And like basically, I mean, it's not like I can use it to hack the planet. For those that don't know, Copilot is Microsoft's basically private self-hosted or Chat GPT, but for your organization. It can read all your emails and SharePoint and all that stuff. My conclusion, because we had a customer, one of our awesome customers, reached out and was like, hey, I don't know, we just subscribed to this. How bad is it? And I was like, I don't know, let me see. And basically my conclusion to them was like, this makes post-exploitation way quicker, but it's not like it's just an immediate, essentially what I had to do is I was like, hey, Copilot, I'm trying to write an email that the whole company would probably be likely to click. And it was like, here's 10 emails that'll work. And it was like, it cited its sources. It linked specific emails. Like, this is an email from marketing that said immediate deadline. And like, I'm like, perfect, great internal spearfish.
So we had another test a few months ago, very similar, an internal AI chatbot, where the tester was like, where's the source code? Because this organization's locked down. It was a Mac only environment. So they didn't have Active Directory. And it was like, well, where's the source code? And it's like, well, the source code is over here at this GitHub repository. And they tried to go to the GitHub repository. It said access denied. They went back to it and they're like, how do we get access to the GitHub repository? And it comes back and it's like, access to the GitHub repository is based on your role in your employee documentation that's put on this. And they had the ability to edit that. So they were able to go in and say, I'm now an administrator, refreshed. And then they had access to it, like and API keys and everything. And literally it just kind of walked them through like being super helpful, which is literally its job.
Yes.
I think,
oh my God.
And I want to kind of throw that in, let's tee that up for the next question. It's very, very easy to dismiss something like AI. It's very, very easy to panic way too much about AI. So when we're looking at the offensive attack space, and I think Corey's story is great for queuing this up, because I think that a lot of people in the offensive realm, whenever they think of AI, they think of like artificial intelligence automated pen testing tools, which are still garbage. Like we can get into that more later. I've already had an entire webcast on that. But my point on that is I don't see that as the problem. I see exactly what we just discussed is the ability to talk to Copilot, the ability to talk to chatbots, and they're a little bit too chatty. It's like a water cooler person that won't shut up and is willing to give you creds. So Ralph, I want to start with you. What are your thoughts on AI as it relates to offensive security? Because we can't do a webcast without talking about it today, because everybody has to freaking talk about it all the time. So you go first, sir.
I think it's awesome from an attacker perspective, right? But it's bad from a defender perspective, because more companies, you got to realize, like, what's the business function, right? Like, why are they doing this? And this is to help them, ask questions to a chatbot as opposed to fielding that through a support desk, right? And so that saves them money. So that's the why, okay? But how that large language model responds and what information it gives you and stuff like that, I mean, that's all kind of like devil's in the details, right? And making it not divulge too much information. So, and it's going to, because that makes it helpful, right? In your example, John, that happened, it was doing its best job, and it actually was a very helpful tool. The problem was it was helping the wrong person, right? And malicious intent. And I think that's really difficult for large language models and AI, right? Quote, to tell what your intent is. So.
All right, Eric, you're up.
Oh boy. So I'm going to date myself a little bit. I'm going to go back to my old CCNA days, where when you log into, your Cisco as root, and it would say, with great power comes great responsibility. Much like Corey, we spun up in a dev box for Sales Copilot and a couple other Copilot features. The amount of data that you're able to see is immense. You've got to start putting controls in place to limit this access for help. Otherwise, your janitor can see all the payroll, right? So
how much does the CEO get paid? I'll tell you.
Exactly. And we've seen examples of people going through on YouTube and demonstrating these type of things.
Yeah. All right, Joff, last one, your thoughts on it. I mean, you're kind of in the realm of creating malware and endpoint, and like you're kind of taking point on that. Is it making any difference in your space? I'm curious about that. I don't know how much you've looked into it.
So yeah, we need to be careful, right? I think when we start talking about artificial intelligence, we tend to focus on the artificial intelligence thing du jour, and that would be specifically large language models that are built with sequential statistical modeling for token text prediction, right? So those entities, their job is to consume very large corpuses of text, mostly, and give predictive output, hence they're called generative AI models, on the amount of data that they have trained on. And in the case of the public open source AIs, they're immense. In fact, I was just reading ChatGPT 3 model had several billion parameters, and here's one for you: consumed 284,000 kilowatt hours of energy just to train it. So, we're in a really interesting space here that this could go off into a whole environmental discussion of using an immense amount of compute power and energy to deliver token predictive models that do positive things for the organization. Now, from a security perspective, look, there are, to my knowledge, and I haven't investigated Copilot, just to put the caveat out there, I've investigated a few others, there are no realistic granular internal controls in how you're able to query that language model that's been trained on your organization from a private organizational perspective, which means that model does not recognize any level of employee in that organization in any sense, in any granular sense at all, if it is a comprehensive model. I mean, there could be organizations that are looking at this from the perspective of segmenting their organizations and generating multiple language models per department unit or per silo in the organization to try to bring in some of that granularity. But I suspect people are just not that far along yet.
No.
So from an offensive perspective, if we discover a language model that we can query inside of an organization, it is 100% a gold mine. And furthermore, if the model is configured such that it is retraining itself from all of the employee inputs, which I suspect they will be configured this way, then the gold mine just gets better and better as the thing ages, right?
Very cool. All right, so I want to move away from AI because I think that we can get sucked into that. Eric will be right back. He just had to step away. But I want to jump right into another controversial topic. At least it was a controversial topic, and I don't know if it is a controversial topic. I'd love to get the attendees' opinions on this as well. Open source tools. Like, one of the big things about offensive teams is we release tools to the public to demonstrate capabilities, but there is something to be said that those tools and those capabilities can totally be picked up by malicious attackers and used in attacks. We've seen this at Black Hills Information Security, whether it's Mail Sniper, Graph Runner, or GCAT, or a number of our different tools and techniques, where we see them being employed by attackers out there. And I really want to get people's opinions on this on the chat discussion as well in Discord, because I think that that's important. Is the open source tools debate still a debate, or did it die with Twitter, Infosec Twitter dying? So Ralph, I'll kick it to you first on this one again, and then we'll circle back to Corey and then Joff, and then we'll close out with Eric. Like, open source tools, is that something still controversial, or is that dead? It's not a problem.
The controversial point being, like, whether they should be released.
Whether they should be, because you remember we had people that were like, why are you releasing this open source tool that is malware, and now the bad people are going to use it, and it's going to make defenders' lives more difficult, which are all valid points. You can't completely disregard them.
Yeah.
But is it still a debate?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's not that big of a deal. I think the only one that really, like, sparks the big kind of uproar is when it's like the POC, whether there's a patch out, whether it was the exact same day the patch got released,
like,
the POC gets released, and
like
then
the ConnectWise vulnerability, whereas that one company like released an exploit immediately before a lot of people
immediately after. And I think the real kind of like heartburn there is their intention, right? Were they just releasing the POC to get a ton of press, right? Good negative press, period.
JetBrains and Rapid7. That's right. Hey, if you want to talk about that here in a second, Corey, I'll kick it over to you. Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry, Ralph.
No, I was just going to say that I think that's really where it hits off. I think other open source tools that are used for attacks is just kind of I don't think it's bad. I don't really see, but I do think that the POC, and then because they're like, oh well, they released this POC, and now somebody who doesn't know how to secure our infrastructure is vulnerable. So and you released it too soon. You didn't give people enough time, and then it's kind of like, well, what is enough time? And the attackers are going to create that POC even if they don't release it too at the same point.
Very cool. Corey, do you want to take next?
Yeah, so I have so many thoughts on this. When you first brought this up, the first thing that I sort of thought of was the Evil Jinx thing. I don't know if this is something that people have been aware of, but for those that don't know, Evil Jinx is an adversary in the middle tool. Basically, it means I can clone a login page for Office 365 or Okta or choose your auth platform. And when people browse to it and use it, they will be logging into the real Office 365, and I will be in the middle capturing their authentication tokens and credentials. This tool, Evil Jinx, has been out for probably 4 years or longer. Yeah. It's been out for a while, and it's been something we've used from the very beginning. It had IOCs baked into it, and this was a factor for attackers because there was, and this is kind of getting into a deeper debate, but yes, the tool creator, knowing its power, built IOCs into it and built a page to allow people to defend against this based on the IOCs, right? But it's open source. So of course, Ralph created a repo that didn't have the IOCs.
I don't know who's sharing their screen. It might be Zach, it might be Jason, but we're seeing you
sorry.
doing
It's
management.
I don't. Anyway, basically so for Evil Jinx, oh wait, yeah, the audience doesn't see it. I don't know. Anyway, I'm just gonna keep rolling. Basically,
okay.
For Evil Jinx, we've been using it for years. It had IOCs baked into it, and essentially the reason I'm bringing it up is because Octo Tempest, Scattered Spider, Alf V, Black Cat, whatever you want to call it, this group has been abusing this tool pretty heavily. And now our customers are coming to me and saying, "Have you heard of Evil Jinx?" And I'm like, "We've been using it for years." So it's funny how it's kind of, the turntables have turned, so to speak. But basically, I think to talk about the open source thing, basically this tool, there's probably an even more powerful closed source version of it, right? And that's kind of how it goes. I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but essentially it being open source, I don't think has a huge impact on whether it's abused or not. I think attackers like myself, looking around the attacker ecosystem quite a bit, people have their own tools. They have different terms for all the things that we think of pen testing tools. And yes, we do see that Scattered Spider and other groups are using tools that we're familiar with, like AAD internals, or I'm sure they'll start using GraphRunner now that it's, super powerful. But my thing is, like, how come no one's talking about how could they set up a web server with Apache and use that to catch Lockbit ransomware attack? How could they set up a Linux server that they use to distribute malware? It's like, okay, well, they were using open source tools to distribute malware. Or how are they using SSH for tunneling? That's an open source tool. It's a weapon. You can't have that. But yeah, like that's really how I feel, is like tool's going to tool. And I think Wade's comment is kind of what I'm going back to close this out. From the very beginning, Wade's a defender, right? And he says, give me your open source tools so I can build detections for them. I think that really sums it up pretty well, of like, if it's way easier to mess around with, test it for yourself. Customers can spin up their own Evil Jinx, build a detection. You're not going to be able to do that if it's some tool that I pay $100 from some criminal in Russia to get, right? Because, it's just complexity and annoyance to get that set up. So that's overall my opinion. I do think Ralph's point about the POC thing is absolutely, you got to be careful with that. You got to know the impact of what you're doing. I think it's like anything else, right? Free speech, but with consequences. Like if you're the firm that disclosed a JetBrains end day, and then it went and compromised, 200 organizations, they're all going to come to you and say, what the hell, man? Like, we were going to patch. You could have just given us a little bit of a warning there.
It would have gotten the press. And we had this cool graphic logo and name for it. We had to run.
Yeah, exactly.
We built the website. We had to release it.
Yeah.
Like, it's like if you're the type of organization that would potentially put others at harm to get some good press. I mean, obviously, it's a complex thing, and oftentimes we see cases where the only way to get cybersecurity change is to go public. That's the sad reality, right? But if the vendor is dragging their feet, you got to go public. That's just how it is. But I think you have to also bear the repercussions of that, and that's something that every company who's publishing this kind of stuff, whether it's open source tools or POCs or whatever it is, it can be good, it can be bad, right? But no one's talking about Linux being used as an open source tool. Like, I don't know. It's like, it's also open source. It's also has all kinds of evil uses, just like any tool. So,
all right, Joff, you're up, because we've been doing this a long time. Like, you've been doing it a long time before I got here. We've been releasing open source tools. Like, you've been here. I think you're like employee number 5 at BHIS. So we've gone through a lot of iterations and a lot of phone calls with the FBI describing what we've just released. But what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I would not want to see us stop publishing open source tools and techniques. I do think we have a responsibility when we publish them to talk about the impact and to talk about potential defensive actions that can help with that impact if we know about them when we publish said tool, whatever that particular tool or technique is. It's I look at it from an educational perspective. I mean, if I'm in a defender's shoes, I would be watching, all the capable pen testers that I knew of and could watch that quite frequently publish tools, so that I can kind of get a feel of the landscape and where things are moving and where I might need to focus my defenses. Yes, we know that potentially threat actors and criminal actors may pick up these tools. That's the risk. But I've always been on the side of it's better to have the knowledge out there in the open than to pretend that these things don't exist and then have the bad guys exploit them and there be no knowledge out in the community as to what kind of issue this is and how you might want to defend against it.
All right, Eric, you're up. You're the defender on this. You're severely outnumbered. What's your take on it?
So a lot of my stuff, Ralph and Joff and Corey, they all, gave really good, excellent points. The one thing I do want to echo that was not discussed, there was many years I pretended to be a pen tester, and got, lucky is what I'll best say. The one thing I've learned through the history of things is going through legitimate processes of bug bounty and things of that nature. Sometimes dropping a POC, while very bad for the community, bad for defenders, and really good for threat actors to potentially get inside of victims, is unfortunately the only way to get corporates' attention on a severity. It's really, really sad. I wish businesses did a better job of accepting pen testers and legitimate disclosure responsibility or practices to their organization more seriously. That way, hopefully, we have less 0 days.
Yeah.
Totally.
So
And
that, go ahead.
also,
go ahead, Corey.
Sorry, one more thing I wanted to mention because it just came to mind when you were saying that. Let's not forget all the supply chain attacks that have come out recently where people are forking GitHub repos of common tools and adding malicious code into them, right? Like sometimes a pen tester is looking for a tool, desperately searching for a CVE, being like, please let there be a GitHub for this, this bad thing. But sometimes that might have malware in it. So that's something we didn't talk about. But that's another fun thing about open source is you might be, it's easier to find something you really shouldn't be touching, I think. But anyway.
Well, so that, on that particular point, Corey, I think the responsibility falls back on the pen tester to understand what they're getting into. And if they don't have sufficient skills to read that source code and understand it, then they need to find somebody that does. Because, whenever you use any open source software, you can't go in blind and just press the go button. It's just, it's dangerous to do so. You are taking a risk. You need to understand what that software does.
Pen testers are not exactly known for being slow, methodical.
Oh, yeah.
We're subtle.
A wild
Trying to shop being subtle. All right. And kind of my take on it is seriously in this industry, if we cannot defend against tools where the full source code with comments is released on GitHub, we're effed. If that's a problem, if it's like, oh crap, you're releasing these whole things out on GitHub and what are we going to, yeah, we're done. Just pack it up. We lost. It's over. It's the wild, wild west. I do want to take a pivot. We were talking about this. We were talking about disclosure. We were talking about all these things, and I'm going to post in a link, the Google app security policy. And there's been a whole bunch of people, guys, and I'm kind of taking a left turn on this, that are talking about, responsible disclosure. Responsible disclosure is important. Responsible disclosure is important. And I feel as a whole that we don't know what that is. Like, I think it sounds good. It's like great, puppies. Everyone loves puppies. They're cute and they're adorable. But everybody that has a puppy knows that they stay up all night barking, yipping, they poop all over the floor, they pee at inopportune times. Puppies come with strings attached. And I look at, like, when people start talking about responsible disclosure, we don't have enough explanation of what that is. All right. So I am going to repost this again a couple of times. I guess I can pin it. It's in the Zoom chat. but I want to go over Google's vulnerability disclosure policy, and I want to get some opinions and hot takes on it. Is this the gold standard? Is this enough? Is it too much? How do we look at it? At Google, they say, we believe that vulnerability disclosure is a two-way street. Vendors as well as researchers must act responsibly. This is why Google adheres to a 90-day disclosure deadline. We notify vendors of vulnerabilities immediately with details shared in public with the defensive community after 90 days or sooner if the vendor releases the fix. And that is something that I think is missed a lot. And Joff, I want to talk to you because you've had some public things that you've released where we've tried to share it with the vendor. They haven't responded for a very, very long time. And lo and behold, as soon as we do a webcast, they get a hold of us during the webcast of us releasing that vulnerability. Yeah. And I want to answer this. So go ahead, you take it first. Is 90 days enough? And I'm going to be kind of interjecting with comments from the audience as well. So Joff, why don't you take it?
Yeah, I mean, so 90 days, I do think is enough. I think it's a matter of, I think something we struggle with is getting the vendor's attention at sufficient level. You might say, hey, look, I found this thing and it does this thing. And I can imagine the discussion at the vendor. They'll go to their chief developer and say, well, hey, look at this report. This thing does this thing. And the developer probably has that immediate developer reaction about their child, right? Because all these software projects are they're precious little babies, and they're going to say, "There's no way that works." And if some executive says, "Well, he said it doesn't work. Let's just ignore this and move on," and that's where we get into trouble, right? So I think it's somewhat, and in some conditions, a matter of the vendor taking the report seriously enough. And that's a tricky thing. Like, how do I know this 2-bit security researcher isn't just some, teenager that's just screwing around versus somebody from a reputable company? Are they going to follow up on that? Do they have process and procedure in place to lock that down? And I think some companies are better than others in that respect. And unfortunately, I think the ones that are in the better than others category seem to be a minority still to this day. And, in our experiences, we go public, we do a webcast, then we get, irritated vendor going, well, we prefer you tell us before you drop to 0 day. And you're like, we did tell you. So and I that's the worst of all results. I mean, we don't want to be in that spot.
Sounds good. Corey, you want to take next?
Sure. I think that this is pretty much the gold standard. I think exactly what Joff said was spot on. You have to have a deadline. You have to say, well, we're going to investigate this, triage this, respond to this, at least acknowledge it, test it, confirm it before it goes public, right? That sort of imminent deadline of it going public is, I think, the thing that's going to be motivating the development teams, the CISO, the PR teams, whatever, depending on how large the disclosure goes. And so I think that, Google also not only supports a ton of products themselves, but has their own vulnerability research team and bug bounty program. They have a huge security program across a bunch of different avenues of, both them discovering vulnerabilities in other products and also supporting some of the highest use products like Google Chrome or Android. So I think that that's the gold standard. I think everyone should pretty much adhere to it. And I do think that is pretty much the norm. I think if you went to a vendor with a disclosure and said, hey, I found this, and then they said, okay, we need 2 years to investigate, you would just kind of laugh and walk away and be like, no, we're not going to do that. So yeah, I think it's a good thing. And I think there could be cases where it needs to be changed or modified. If you're talking about a 0 day in a product like Microsoft Windows and they get back to you and say, hey, we know that there's a 90-day disclosure period, but you should know this patch is not going to be live until 120 or 240 days or whatever it is. Do with that information what you will. You could potentially make your own decision based on that or whatever. But I guess it's like there could be cases where that needs to be longer if they're long product life cycles, or like another big one would be in the industrial controls area of like, okay, there's a 0-day in Siemens PLCs or whatever. Patching is going to take a long time. Like it could involve replacing hardware, or like Spectre and Meltdown are other examples. You might have to replace hardware. You might have to completely reimage or update things. So I think there are cases where it could be longer, but I think this is still the gold standard, personally.
Cool. So Eric, I'm going to change the question a little bit for you.
Okay.
And this is something that I've been wondering a lot. We kind of get into like the echo chamber of BHIS and everything that we're doing here. And you're working incidents, you're right on the front line, you're dealing with these attacks. Doesn't even matter. I mean, it seems like a lot of the organizations that we do IR for are organizations that get hit with cloud stuff, of course, but take that off the table. Sometimes it's like, look, this was a vulnerability that was released publicly a year and a half ago, and the patch has been out for a year and a half. It seems sometimes like we spend all of this time talking about it, but we're all preaching to the choir. We're in the echo chamber. We're talking to people that are already going to be patching. And no matter how much it seems like we're going to be missing the people, no matter how much we try to dance around 0-day disclosure and all that, there's just flat out people that aren't going to patch. And I want to see if that's what you're seeing as well. And do you think that there's a hot take on how we can be better about this? Because going back to the CISA thing, sure, CISA is great, but it's just another thing in the echo chamber. So what's your take?
I think I'm going to take over the entire conference now, ladies and gentlemen. See y'all later. Here we go. So let's talk about CISA for a second. I'm very, I know I'm going to upset some people, but, people love Jen Housley, and I think she's trying to do some good efforts. But, when you take a look at the last 3-5 years of, cybersecurity yearly in October, that, they're putting out the same thing, as, security awareness, because we're not doing the basics, right? Yeah. We're doing the same things over and over. We're just putting a new marketing skin on it. So we're not doing stuff. And I think, to that point, we'll pivot over to the patching side, where yes, when you have things that are a year old, a year and a half, 2 years old, things of that nature, does that classify as negligence or gross negligence? It's really a legal matter to determine. If the IT guy is saying, to the owner, hey, we really need to patch it, and business is like, no, we can't be down, 10 minutes because it costs $10,000 per 10 minutes to make Bob sprockets, and it's an unacceptable loss, right? So, where does that kind of fall in? But there needs to be an acceptable patch cycle for these things. But we do see that where we've got several cases going on right now from SonicWall, VPN exploits that are over a year old, 2 years old. And they're like, oh, we didn't know about that. Really? When you log into SonicWall, it's telling you big.
It's giving you a banner, man.
Yeah. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So it's really bad. And I will talk about y'all's side for 1 second. Again, because like I did a really horrid job at pen testing, but the one thing that I really seen a lot of traction being made, if you are in that pen tester space, is showing that proof of concept, right? It's not just, the freaking emails. Hey, we see security issues on your website. Okay, yes, you're another, person trying to sell me a vulnerability on my WordPress or something that you think you see robots.txt file, whatever, get out of here. But you're taking a different approach. Like, hey, we see this vulnerability. I'm coming to you as a responsible person. Here's my proof of concept. And doing the responsible thing, I think gets a lot of better traction. And I think from at least my side, dealing with developers, they're inundated by so many emails. Like I just mentioned, hey, we see vulnerability, we see this, we see that. And it's, I think a lot of the notifications get washed in the filters. Maybe they even have an inbox rule that goes to disclosure management or something, and they check it once a month. So, maybe taking Google's approach of 90 days is acceptable. I know a lot of people want that instant gratification, and haha, look at me, I'm top dog. I popped TeamViewer, I popped whoever, and they want to be able to get that quote unquote street cred. So it's we got to find a good working medium inside of organizations from all aspects. And I think everybody plays a part in it, as much as I hate to say it, but it's everybody's responsibility for security and helping each other achieve the overall goal in making businesses more secure.
Yeah, there was a bunch of love that went out for Jen Easterly, who's the director of CISA. I really feel bad for her, like right, really, really bad, because it's like, hey Jen, welcome to the new job. So just so you know, your job is to go through and secure all of the government information systems. No, scratch that. How about your job is to secure those systems and all the critical infrastructure of the entire United States? Get right on that, Jen. That'll be awesome. And oh, by the way, when you're done with that, could you please tackle peace in the Middle East? We've had a little dust up there recently. I figure after you secure all the things, that won't be that hard. I mean, it's just like that job is insane to be able to try to take that on. So she's doing a good job of trying to deal with that.
And
Yeah, it's like you take Jen Easterly and put her in the movie Bruce Almighty.
Like going through and solving all the problems. Yeah.
Can I talk quickly about the
Sure.
upside of the vulnerability disclosure, right? So some of these 0 days are actively being exploited and traded. And sometimes it's not just good faith researchers that find a 0 day, right? There is a whole market for selling these kinds of exploits to governments and internally, right? So this industry is a bit like, it's not just security researchers that find 0 days, okay? Now, you can call them security researchers all you want, but what happens with that could be a whole market, right? And my point that I'm trying to bring up is about this disclosure timeline, right? Sometimes, what happens is that somebody will be investigating an attack and discover that there is probably a vulnerability in the software that caused this attack. Once they figure it out, now they're disclosing that to the vendor, and this timeline gets accelerated significantly because this is actively being exploited. Someone may have discovered it and traded it. So I think there's a lot to be said about this timeline, right? And sometimes it gets pressed really fast if it's being actively exploited.
Yep. So Joff, we had a question from Dr. Auger. He asked, whenever we're disclosing a vulnerability to a vendor, do we have lawyers involved? I don't think we've ever once had a lawyer in the room on our side in working with vendors, whether it was Oracle and PeopleSoft or the VPN or like any of the number of the different groups that we found vulnerabilities in their software. I don't think we've ever once in all the years that we've been running this had lawyers in the room, have we?
No, I don't recall at any point of us having lawyers involved. We have sort of sat back and watched the response, and I think from time to time considered, maybe we should call up legal. But it's never gotten to a point of being too acrimonious that we felt like it was necessary.
I got a question for you too, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
So how many times have you guys received cease and desist orders from doing notifications?
I think twice. And that led into conversations with attorneys. And those usually don't last real long. For two reasons. The first reason, I just shared this out with everybody in the chat. This is the Department of Justice definition of good faith security research. And like what we do at Black Hills Information Security directly is in line with good faith security research. And I want to put this out there for everybody that wants to get into offensive security and they want to start researching things and they're afraid that they're going to get sued. They're afraid that they're going to go to jail. If you adhere to this guideline, good faith security research means accessing computers solely for the purpose of good faith testing, investigation or correction of security flaw or vulnerability, where such activity is carried out in a manner designed to avoid harm to individuals and the public, where the information derived from the activity is primarily used to promote security, safety of the class of devices, machines, or online services. The point is, if you're doing good faith security research, you find a vulnerability and you release said vulnerability, and you're working with the vendor within that 90-day window, you're doing good faith security research. If you immediately jump on like some Slack channel and you start posting all the stuff that you successfully hacked, showing it off, and downloading personal information, you've crossed that line. So that is the definition of good faith security research. The other thing, Eric, that we get whenever somebody sends us a cease and desist, or if we know that we're getting close to a cease and desist, or we're communicating with attorneys, a lot of times they try to bring up either Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, or they try to bring up the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And if you look at the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, there's actually a clause in it. I think I've got it here. Let's see if I can copy and share it with everybody. There's 2 areas and exceptions in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that is basically protecting us. So the first one is reverse engineering. This is 1201F. Exception permits circumvention and the development of technological means such as circumvention by a person who has lawfully obtained the right to use a copy of a computer program for the sole purpose of identifying and analyzing elements of the program necessary to achieve interoperability with other programs. We just point out to them that we're making their product interoperable with the Metasploit framework. There is also the encryption research in there as well. So yes, we have dealt with this, but usually as soon as we start talking to attorneys, I don't want to sound like an asshole, but I'm going to sound like an asshole. We probably know more about the computer security legal landscape than a lot of the attorneys that these companies will bring against us. And usually once we put these 2 things out, the other one is the, Joff, what is it? It's Electronic Consumer Protection Act. I can't remember the exact name, but we can speak publicly about things that we find. They cannot gag us. If we say your product is a hot piece of garbage from a security perspective, we're well within our legal bounds to say that. Even if there's something in a contract that says that we can't, all of those clauses are retroactively nullified by the Electronic Communications Protection Act. So yes, we do get into these situations, but what I'm trying to say, I guess, is Joff and I are old. We've been around a long time. Joff just a hair longer than me. And we've been around when the magic was created and, seeing these things. So there are some things that bother me, and I kind of wanted to close this with you guys. Canada's talking about banning Flipper Zero. I know this is just a T-ball question, but good idea, bad idea. And we'll close out with this and maybe a couple of questions.
Well,
Joff,
before,
go ahead.
I was going to say that was not legal advice from John Strand.
Yeah, that was
no.
That was not legal advice.
I don't care.
We don't give legal advice. Okay, Johns. But the other thing I wanted to say is that Black Hills very intentionally is not a company that deals in 0 days explicitly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is something that we kind of oscillated between the 0 day conversation, the end day conversation, responsible disclosure. Very intentionally, we don't purchase 0 days. We don't sell 0 days. We don't intentionally research 0 days.
And if we do find a 0 day, we hand it over to the customer and the customer can coordinate it with their vendor so that they can handle it. And I want to explain why that is, Corey. Yeah. When we've worked with companies in the past where we found 0 days, the amount of money I've lost at Black Hills Information Security is staggering. Where we communicate, they want more details. They want packet captures. They want diagrams. They want us to show up to their effing office with crayons so we can show them exactly where the effing boo-boo is in their road.
True.
It's so much easier for us just to say, hey, customer, this is a 0 day. And they talk to the vendor, and the vendor is more apt to listen to a paying customer than they are a pen testing firm. Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
So
sorry.
I just wanted to throw that out there because I don't want to give people misconceptions about what we do as a company. Companies that work and trade in 0 days are going to have totally different crazy things they're going to have to deal with. But anyway, on to the question. Sorry.
Well, I also wanted to just sort of drive home the additional comment that John made, and I think this deserves a little bit of emphasis, right? We at Black Hills and many other information security companies, we do engage in good faith security research, okay? Mm-hmm. But there's a really big difference in saying, I found something, I can use it to, our advantage in engagements. These engagements are under contract. I can then tell the customer what the vulnerability is, and we're completely under a legally contract binding vehicle in that engagement. There's a really, really big difference, as John was saying, in as a part of your job going, okay, I did this good faith research. I found something. Now I'm going to go out and hack all my friends and my colleagues and anybody I just don't like that day. And then you have so far crossed the line that you are in big, big jeopardy if you act that way. And it's really important to, have a sense of ethical responsibility. Yes, we're doing things that can potentially be considered in some cases as coming close to the the lines of Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, but we're doing it under paid customer contracts, usually non-disclosure agreements, and we're doing it in good faith, just as the Justice Department talks about. And that's it's important to watch those boundaries and keep them very, very clear to ourselves, all of our employees, and anybody else who's interested in this industry.
Well,
Totally.
and Joff, I want to kind of springboard off you too. Like I was kind of flippant, and thank you guys for kind of pulling me back, I guess, a little bit. Yeah, we aren't dropping end days and 0 days on the public and doing all of that because, like I said, our job is to make our job harder, right? It is not the job of what we do when we find a vulnerability to immediately run, do a webcast on it to try to build as much cred around that specific thing as we can. When we do find these vulnerabilities, we'll coordinate with the customers, many times, many of our internal customers first. Then we coordinate with the vendor, right? We try to set up the time frame for them to respond. And then there's times where we just won't release stuff. We just don't for a variety of different reasons because we believe that it is detrimental to the community as a whole. But kind of sticking on this 0 day theme, yeah, you find 0 days in what we do. And if anybody ever tries to tell you in this community, and I want to make this very, very clear, there are people in this community that believe that writing 0 days and writing exploits is the end all be all pinnacle of computer security. Those people are a-holes. Don't party with those people. Okay. They have a specific skill set. It's a very cool skill set. It's a very valid skill set, but they try to define everything as far as overall value within the society that we have built in InfoSec around their specific skill sets. We have people in this industry that are offensive. We have people in this industry that are defensive, the forensics. We have GRC people. We have line SOC analysts. We have all these people, and they're never going to write an effing 0 day. And they're all very important to what we do every single day and grinding out and trying to secure organizations. So with that, we've got a few minutes. The pendulum goes back and forth, everybody. I'm going to say that this pendulum was definitely leaning towards Eric's side of the house. We had lots of people, doing defer. We had lots of people doing blue team. And red team kind of got a little bit of a bad name, mainly because there was a bunch of us that were a-holes and not fun to hang out with. So I want to go around. Is it finally cool to be a red teamer again, to be offensive? Joff, you take it.
Yeah, I think it is cool to be a red teamer. But for those that are considering, do not underestimate the level of effort. This industry has drastically changed, and the amount of skills and effort you need to be an effective red teamer is way, way harder than it was even as little as 5 years ago.
Corey, your take. Is it back to being cool to being a red teamer? We don't get flamed on Twitter for releasing open source tools or having talks. Like, is the pendulum coming back to red now a little bit, or where are we at?
Yeah, I don't know. I think my head's about 6 feet deep in the sand, so I can't really comment. I think my take is that it's kind of like being an introvert or an extrovert. Do you want to be the thing that happens, or do you want to wait around for things to happen? It's kind of a personality question, but I personally like being the thing that happens, and that's just my take.
Dude, I got to be honest. I've never once thought of it that way. That is really cool. I think it also aligns with a lot of red teamers have attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. Wait, probably
no, don't talk about that, John.
We don't.
That's HIPAA
Defenders have
violation.
that too. Defenders have that too.
Yeah, they're all.
All right, Ralph, your take.
I feel cool. No, I mean I think that the I don't know. Is it cooler to be red team blue? To tell you the truth, I'll give you this one take. The more I do offensive stuff, the more I appreciate defensive stuff. The more I find the value in the flip side of that equation, right? Because the more I try to not be detected, the more I see the other side, right? So, yeah.
Very cool. All right, Eric, what is your take? Do you feel like you're on the outs? Are you on the not cool team? Or do you feel like you're on the cool team? You're doing the blue stuff, and that's where it's at.
Oh, we're definitely not cool by any means. DFIR is definitely not a cool thing because, we are being brought up when it's hit the fan. Internal IT, MSP think we're going to be there too.
Yeah.
They got to blame somebody, and they're paying you.
Generating.
Yeah, so they think we're going to throw them under the bus. We're going to get them fired. But to answer the original question, I think red team has always been cool. I do think, especially when we're wrapping up our engagements and we're giving those pieces of advice, how do we prevent this thing? Were we able to determine that root cause analysis and give that that sound advice. Hey, you need to do X, Y, Z, or whatever the case is, or follow this framework to secure your entire infrastructure. And then being able to have a red team like Black Hills come in and say, we tested all this stuff. You're really, really good now. And, so I think it's always been cool from a verification standpoint for any organization to, use red teamers.
Yeah, not to hijack, but Wade's comment of, there is really no red team, we're all blue teamers in the end, is how I look at it. And I think how everyone looks at it. And I think we all need to just share our tiers with each other, because blue teamers, you guys love red team tiers, and I share them freely. If something was really hard and really annoying, I don't downplay it. I tell the customer, why are your defenses so secure? It's super annoying. And then they usually share their tiers back with us and say, well, it took us 6 years to get that EDR up and running. And I'm like, okay, thanks. So, it's like,
really
share
bad.
your pain, don't make it an adversarial thing.
I just wanted to mention one thing that I don't think we mentioned in that last closing thoughts, and that was the degree of sophisticated and really, frankly, very sexy technology that has come to the table in the last 5 years to help defense is amazing and is to be appreciated. And there's just a lot more attraction in that side of the industry than there was before. You go back a decade and it was doom and gloom on the defensive side. It is not that way anymore. And I think that, to me, is the most exciting thing that's happened in this industry.
And with that, we need to take it out. I want to say thank you very much to my panel. It was a great discussion. Thank you for all of you that are attending. And also, please remember, starting tomorrow, we have, whether you're liking blue or red, we have all kinds of badass, affordable security training classes that are starting up over the next couple of days. Can't wait to see you in another talk and see you in a training class over the next couple of days. And with that, we're out. Go forth and do great things, and we'll see you in the rest of the con, everybody.
Yep. Thank you, John. And thank you to the rest of the panel. We are going to be starting our next talk here with Travis Weathers and Ralph May. So if you guys are interested in enjoying that,
Ralph's like, I'm never going to get back to sleep, man.
I know, man. So just go ahead and leave this session, go back to the lobby, and then you can join that talk with Travis and Ralph. And then we will be joining you back here again at 12:30, and we'll be getting started again with John Askew. So again, if you guys want to go check out Ralph's talk and Travis, go back to the lobby, and then y'all can join that talk there. So thank you again to all the panelists, and let's get started with that next talk.